The concept of a pre-tribulation rapture is based on certain interpretations of biblical passages. While interpretations can vary among individuals and religious groups, here are 5 points often presented to support the idea of a pre-tribulation rapture. Imminent return. Advocates argue that Jesus' return is imminent and can happen at any moment. They believe the rapture will occur before the period of tribulation, which they view as a distinct event separate from the second coming of Christ. Escape from wrath. It is suggested that believers will be spared from the intense tribulation and God's wrath poured out upon the earth during that time. They reference passages such as 1 Thessalonians 1 verse 10 and 5:9, which speak of Christians being saved from the wrath to come. Heavenly dwelling. Pre-tribulation proponents emphasize the idea that believers will be taken to heaven to dwell with Jesus during the tribulation period. They cite passages like John 14 verses 2-3, which mentions Jesus preparing a place for believers in his Father's house. Absence of church in tribulation texts. Supporters argue that the church, represented by believers, is absent from explicit references to the tribulation period in the book of Revelation. This leads them to conclude that the church is no longer on earth during that time. Historical theology. Some proponents of the pre-tribulation rapture claimed that the early church fathers and certain Christian leaders throughout history held a pre-tribulation view. They argue that this historical precedent lends support to their interpretation. It's important to note that the concept of the rapture and its timing is a subject of ongoing theological debate, and various interpretations exist. Christians hold differing views on this topic, and it's ultimately a matter of personal belief and interpretation of biblical passages. While interpretations of biblical prophecies regarding the rapture and its timing vary, here are 5 points often presented by those who do not support the idea of a pre-tribulation rapture. Absence in Scripture. Critics argue that the concept of a pre-tribulation rapture is not explicitly mentioned in the Bible. They maintain that the passages commonly cited in support of a pre-tribulation rapture can be interpreted differently, or are more compatible with alternative views. Post-tribulation references. Opponents of the pre-tribulation rapture highlight passages such as Matthew 24 verses 29-31, and 1 Thessalonians 4 verses 16-17, which describe the return of Christ and the gathering of believers after the tribulation period. Historical development. Critics suggest that the idea of a pre-tribulation rapture emerged relatively recently in the 19th century, primarily through the teachings of John Nelson Darby and the subsequent rise of dispensationalism. They question why such a significant doctrine would not have been clearly taught by earlier theologians if it were a fundamental aspect of Christian belief. Church suffering in history. Those who reject the pre-tribulation rapture point out that throughout history, Christians have experienced persecution, tribulation, and martyrdom. They argue that if the pre-tribulation rapture were true, there would be no need for the church to endure such hardships. Unity of the Second Coming. Critics emphasize the unity of the Second Coming of Christ, seeing it as a single event that includes the resurrection of the righteous and the judgment of the wicked. They view the notion of a separate pre-tribulation rapture as unnecessary and inconsistent with the overall biblical narrative. Remember, the interpretation of biblical prophecy and the timing of the rapture is a subject of theological debate among Christians. Different perspectives exist, and it's essential to approach these discussions with respect and a willingness to consider various viewpoints.
So another thing about the rapture, I used to be for the rapture, then I was against it. Then I started to go for it again, and now I'm against it again. I started realizing, where does Satan live? Where's his throne? It's not hell. It's the sky. It's the second heaven, right? Principalities and rulers of the air. That's why we see lights and UFOs and everything up in the sky. So it says we gather together to meet Jesus in the air, in the clouds, right? Well, Michael, before that happens, Michael has to kick Lucifer out and sends him down to earth. Remember? So until that happens, we just can't go to his domain and just hang out there and have a feast for 3.5 years or whatever it is, right? So I think that's a good point right there. Besides that, just like, comment, and subscribe. Commenting, liking, it's big. It pushes the video that you're watching out. Subscribing, it's even bigger. It basically promotes the future videos, right? If you have a lot of subscriptions, YouTube's going to promote it, so that's huge. Please subscribe. All right, later.